On August 15th, 1977, astronomer Jerry R. Ehman may have been the only human being to have ever made contact with an extraterrestrial race. In 1959, 18 years earlier, physicists realized that a radio frequency of 1420 MHz would be needed to contact extraterrestrial life, a frequency naturally emitted by hydrogen. Since hydrogen is the single most common element in our universe, this theoretically suggests that it would be familiar to other life forms as well. It wasn't until 1973, after 14 years of extensive research of extragalactic radio sources, that a radio telescope was set up to help the search for alien life. This telescope was nicknamed Big Ear. In 1977, Jerry Ehman was working as a volunteer analysing large amounts of data processed by an IBM 1130 computer. The data was then recorded onto lined printer paper, which Ehman had to check manually by hand. But on this particular day, August the 15th at 10:16 p.m, Ehman did a routine experiment and may have changed the world of science forever, though he wouldn't discover this find until days later. When Ehman sat down to look over the paperwork, he and his colleagues were amazed at what they saw. The signal provided no decipherable message, but it showed that a signal was received and possibly attempted a response. It was an unmodulated, continuous wave lasting 72 seconds. Jerry was so amazed at this discovery that he wrote "wow" on the printout, leading to this now famously being called the wow signal. If the signal had lasted less than 10 seconds, or even slightly longer than its successful 72, it may not have been detectable at all. Many believe that they've actually cracked the code in the signal, but Ehman admitted that these are just numbers input by their team of humans and nothing extraterrestrial. However, once Ehman documented his findings, John Krause, the director of the observatory, did the same thing, and both came out with different values of the frequencies. It's believed that this was simply due to the university's equipment making a typing error, and this was later amended. The telescope was only adjustable to account for altitude, and simply relied on the rotation of the Earth to scan across the sky. It would shoot a beam into the sky and seemingly pan across the area, picking up the atmosphere. It would have shot an empty plane before passing over whatever caused this signal, thus intensifying it and then passing by it. Due to this, the Big Ear would be able to record any given point for only 72 seconds. If this was in fact an extraterrestrial response signal, it would have gradually increased its intensity after the first 36 seconds, peaking in the center and then gradually decreasing as the telescope moved away from the target. And all of this took place. Unfortunately, the exact location of the signal is difficult to pinpoint. The Big Ear had two feed horns, and they can both receive a beam from two different locations whilst the Earth is rotating. Though only one of the feed horns picked up the signal, it's impossible to know which one due to how the data was processed back then. Because of this, we have two possible locations for the signal. But one thing is for sure, no human being has ever been to either. Both horns at least put the signal about 19 degrees towards the southeast of the galactic plane and about 25 degrees east of the galactic center. This area of the sky is northwest of the globular cluster M55 in the Sagittarius constellation. The closest visible star to this location is Tau Sagittarii. There were, however, no stars that resembled suns in this area, though there were about 6 other stars in the distance that were too difficult to see. Over the years, this signal has been considered completely viable, but the location of it remains open. One theory is that the whole thing was just a case of interstellar scintillation from a much weaker radio signal. This would be a signal caused by weaker radio waves fluctuating during the density of electrons and protons to cause a much stronger one, causing the illusion of an extraterrestrial response. There was a much stronger radio astronomy observatory known as the Very Large Array, and despite it being more powerful, it did not pick up the signal. However, this actually works in the favour of those longing for this to be a story about aliens. It's actually more likely for this to be a genuinely authentic signal, as the Very Large Array would have picked up the signal if it was caused by interstellar scintillation, which it didn't. It doesn't make it impossible, but admittedly very unlikely. Jerry Ehman himself attempted to make this contact again over 50 times in the months that followed, but was never successful. Usually the signal would have happened 3 minutes apart in each of the horns, but this didn't take place. Ehman initially believed that it wasn't the real deal. He thought that it was from some interference on Earth reflecting off of a piece of space debris, though this theory was investigated and it was deemed very unlikely to have been caused by something on Earth. It wouldn't be impossible, but it would rely on a lot of very specific requirements, and the odds are very low. However, Ehman later retracted his claim and believed this to be genuine contact. Furthermore, the 1420 MHz frequency being from Earth would have been extremely difficult, considering this was all done within a protected spectrum, all for astronomical purposes. Over the years, Ehman did consider the possibility that the military may have caused it, though due to the fact that this signal was never replicated, most believed that it was just a one-off, and not a genuine contact with an alien species. In 1987 and 1989, astronomer Robert H. Gray attempted to find the same signal but failed. In July of 1995, signal detection software was tested by H. Paul Shush using a 12-meter radio telescope, using the exact same coordinates as the original signal, with 0 results. 6 14-hour tests were done at the same location in the sky, but nothing was found. In 2012, 35 years since the signal, Arecibo Observatory beamed a digital stream using 10,000 Twitter messages using hashtags, video vignettes, and clips of various celebrities. It was believed that this would be considered an intentional attempt at communication if found by another life form, even attaching a header to every single message, and they beamed it at 20 times the power of the most powerful commercial radio transmitter, and there was still no response. It wasn't until 2017, 40 years since the discovery, when Antonio Paris, a teacher from Florida, suggested that a hydrogen cloud surrounding 2 comets which were in the same region of the sky could have caused the signal. The comets were 266P/Christensen and P/2008Y2 Gibbs, which were passing through that part of the sky in 1977. This would explain why the signal couldn't be repeated again, as the comets would have passed by our orbit. To further test this theory, this area of the sky was surveyed once again with a 10-meter radio telescope as one of the same comets passed through the region again, and it was believed that the signal was nearly identical. The only difference was that the 1977 signal was a lot stronger, due to the new telescope being smaller than the Big Ear. But furthermore, comets do lose mass as they pass through an inner solar system, so this would explain why its signal would have been weaker than 40 years earlier, though it's worth noting that this theory has not been definitively proven. Some believe that it holds up, while others dismiss it as comets don't emit enough of a frequency as needed, and it also doesn't make sense why a comet would have been found in one horn and not the other. Was Jerry Ehman on the verge of making contact with another race? Did they try to respond and have been unable to do so ever since? Was this a technical glitch or some kind of interference from somewhere else? This has been the most successful radio contact with an outside life form in history, and whether it's genuine or not, we are still seeking answers.